Over the past several years, I've repeatedly told anyone who would listen that I'm an optimist. I firmly believe that America's best days are still to come. But that optimism has always come with an important caveat. Things are likely to get worse before they get better. And as I've been looking at some recent polling data, well, it's pretty clear that we're now in the getting worse phase. For decades, the political dialogue has been growing ever more polluted by toxic partisanship. We've reached the point where most Republicans think that most Democrats have rejected America's founding ideals of freedom, equality, and self-governance. At the same time, most Democrats think most Republicans have rejected those ideals. In this year's presidential election, just 13% of Harris voters can even understand how a reasonable person could consider voting for Donald Trump. Oh, and by the way, only 22% of Trump voters can understand how a reasonable person could even consider voting for Vice President Harris. Both sides have come to believe that America cannot survive if the other team wins. Well, in the wake of the second assassination attempt on Donald Trump, the numbers grew even more depressing. About half of all Republicans say it's at least somewhat likely that U.S. government officials, Democrats, and the Harris campaign were involved in the assassination attempts. Oh, and about half of Democrats think Trump and his campaign may have been involved in staging these events, fake events. Worst of all, 28% of Democrats say America would be better off if Donald Trump had been killed in those attempts. Another 24%, they're just not sure. That means fewer than half of all Democrats can bring themselves to say that it'd be bad for the nation to have the other team's candidate assassinated. And by the way, look, the numbers would be pretty much the same for Republicans if the roles were reversed. That's the partisan world we live in today. These numbers, the attitudes that they reveal, are horrific. It is hard to imagine a greater threat to democracy than expressing a desire to have your political opponent murdered. So, with all of this, how can I still be an optimist? Well, there's three reasons. First, I know that positive change in America always begins outside of official Washington. Oh, I'm frustrated with our broken political system, but I'm not expecting politicians to lead our nation forward. They are not the answer. Second, the American people continue to embrace our noble founding ideals of freedom, equality, and self-governance. That's the real source of my hope. And finally, well, we've been through this before as a nation. I'm old enough to remember the 60s and 70s when many people thought our best days had come and gone. Some even thought, oh, we can never keep up with the Soviet Union. We'll never outlast them. But we did. America is resilient. We got through tough times then, and we'll get through troubled times today. As long as we keep reaching as a people to make those founding ideals a reality, America will remain an exceptional nation. We will remain a beacon of liberty and hope for a world that desperately needs it. Those are my thoughts.
Wow, that is a powerful commentary and kind of depressing. I just can't believe that people really have that kind of hate there, especially for a person.
As I said in the opening statement here, I think the problems will be solved outside of Washington. What that means is that if you find somebody from the other party and you disagree with them, you don't have to hate them.
Right.
Let's find ways in states and communities to begin to build this, and then maybe our politicians will figure it out.
But you also uncover something else, and I don't think I think the focus is more on the DRI, whatever, the label. But when we talk about issues, a lot of people are right there in the middle, wiggling one way or the other. But I think that there's more that unites us than divides us.
As a people, that's absolutely true. Politically, the problem that we run into
are the politicians.
And no matter what you think of the candidates, they're both imperfect. We're all imperfect. And so people are making a choice, and then they're projecting their hopes and dreams on that person.
Yep.
Hopes and dreams that no one person can really hold up to. When you talk about debates, everybody wants to say who won.
Right.
Well, to me, the question is what defines winning? Pretty clearly, most people thought Harris did better than Trump.
Yeah.
Maybe she won in that sense. but did she really make any ground? Did it change the election? And
on the specifics, the
and on
things
the
that people
specifics.
really care about.
That's right.
Inflation is one of the biggest.
That's right. All year, there have been three issues at the top of the list: inflation, other economic concerns, and immigration. Voters have consistently, week in and week out, said those are the issues. So who do they trust more on this? Well, right now, after the debate, 49% of voters say they trust Trump more than Harris. 40% more say they trust Harris more. That's a decent gap, but one of the bigger gaps we see.
What about the shift from pre-debate?
Oh, well, actually, there wasn't much.
Wow.
3-point shift in each direction. Maybe this means things shifted a little bit in Trump's direction, or maybe it just means it's margin of error, some statistical noise along the way.
And economy, another big one.
Oh, that's right. Other economic concerns, well, when we look at that, the numbers are a little closer. Trump is trusted more by just a 4-point margin, 47 to 43. What about pre-debate? Well, big change here. It was 47-42. I mean, there's no change whatsoever. And, part of that's because, Trump talked about his tariff program. Harris talked about her ideas, and they talked about it in ways that sounded like gobbledygook to most voters. And, oh, by the way,
it's not the way people talk.
It's not the way people talk, and there were no swing voters watching anyhow. So it really didn't make much of a difference on that.
This is another big one that people have talked about.
Right. Look, this is a Trump issue since 2016. This is probably the issue that got him elected in the first place. Not surprisingly, the former president has a big edge on this. 51% trust Trump, 39% Harris.
And before?
Once again, hardly any change. Edie, I think that's the big story here. The media built this event up. And by the way, ABC had good ratings. I'm sure they were happy despite all the grief they've taken since. But the reality is, nothing changed.
Let me ask you this, because when I watch the debate and I hear a lot of lovely things, in the back of my mind, I'm going, are they really going to do that? Do they really mean that? Because sometimes they say the opposite of what they've said before, or they say something that it's like pie in the sky. How are you ever going to do that?
Right. Voters really are skeptical about their ability to deliver on their promises or even their sincerity in trying. One thing that was really interesting on this issue of immigration, Kamala Harris came out very strongly talking about how she's done all these things to enforce the border. Well, we ask a question. If she is elected, will illegal immigration go up or down? More than 40% before the debate said it'll go up if she wins. And after the debate, no change.
Really?
There was no perceptible, no measurable change on the perceptions of the candidates on these issues. Now, one thing that we do a lot, so I tend to think maybe, I don't know, immigration might be my top issue. You would have your own.
Education.
Education. What we actually do is we go and we find out what they consider the most important issue, and then we ask them who they trust on a variety of issues. But the biggest thing we look for is, who do you trust most on the issue that is most important to you? When we look at that right now, former President Trump, well, 48% trust him more on their top issue, 44% say for Vice President Harris. Before the debate, it was 46-46, so a couple of points swing. Yeah, look, this is all very much a minor change, and at the same time we saw this shift to President Trump. Vice President Harris actually moved up a little bit in the horse race polling by a couple
So the
points.
top line is, it's still a horse race.
It's still a toss-up no matter how you look at it. Nobody knows who's going to win.
Our data reveals there is common ground on what is perceived frequently as the most divisive political issues. So, Scott, what are the voters saying to you about them?
Well, let's start with abortion. Hugely controversial issue in the political arena. 59% of voters say it is possible both to protect a woman's right to choose and to reduce the number of abortions. And really importantly, no gap between men and women on that. No gap between Republicans and Democrats.
Really?
This is a very, very strong piece of common ground. But what happens in the political world, the politicians say, you must have this or this. We're going to force you to choose. And voters are saying, no, not or, but and. Right. If we try to help women in difficult situations, we can accomplish both of these goals.
I mean, because there are gray areas.
Because there are gray areas.
Yes, exactly.
And because you have to think outside of the political extreme boxes.
What about opportunity?
So a lot of concern about inequality in the nation. And, one of the proposals that always comes up from Bernie Sanders and others is we got to tax the rich. Most voters say the real key is opening up more opportunities for lower income Americans. Give them a chance to succeed. Create that mobility. Most think it is possible for just about anybody who's willing to work their way out of poverty. And oh, by the way, those nasty rich people, it's not that they don't want to see higher taxes on them, but voters tell us 73% of voters say that if somebody creates a product and it's really popular and it's used by millions of people, yes, they should be allowed. It's fair for them to be fabulously rich because of what they gave to society. Inequality is a serious issue. We need to find ways to address it. But mostly what voters tell us throughout all the polls is we want everybody to have a chance to succeed and to work themselves up and create a better family or a future for their family.
Yeah. Another issue that we've talked a lot about recently, I think a lot in this election, and that is censoring social media, the social media speech.
Right. And, people have this discomfort with misinformation, disinformation, fake news, whatever they want to call it. People on all sides politically are concerned about that. Yeah. Most voters, though, say letting the government decide what is misinformation or disinformation or fake news is a bigger problem than the misinformation itself. And this kind of highlights a different gap. Only 16% of voters, 1 out of 6, think government should be allowed to censor social media posts, which means, again, you've got 8 out of 10 Americans on the other side.
The biggest news immediately after the debate was that Taylor Swift endorsed Vice President Harris, and then she posted a pretty funny photo with her cat. But do celebrity endorsements really give a big boost to the candidates or not? I mean, have they worked in the past? We've taken a bit of a look at this. But you've got a Taylor Swift number.
YouGov did a survey asking if this would make you more or less likely to vote for Taylor Swift. I think the numbers were 8% said more likely, 20% said less likely. The truth is the Taylor Swift endorsement is good to talk about, but it's not really going to have an impact unless she would do something like show up at a voter registration event and say, come on out and see me and register to vote.
Giving them ideas. Yeah. The celebrity endorsement thing has gone back for so long. Al Jolson he not only endorsed Harding, but he actually wrote the theme song for the campaign. So that was a big one.
That's a pretty cool endorsement.
And then maybe it's singers, Frank Sinatra. This was an interesting one because Frank Sinatra was really pushing for JFK. And then when, kind of whispers about mob ties came out, he was persona non grata. He was disinvited to the inauguration, and he switched parties, and he then started supporting Ronald Reagan for governor and then president.
Wow. Well, I've heard Babe Ruth offered endorsements. One of the most important endorsements ever was Martin Luther King Sr. People don't remember this, but in 1960, the Republicans still attracted a big portion of the black vote. And Martin Luther King Sr. was expecting to support Nixon, but the famous Martin Luther King Jr. was imprisoned. Nixon was too busy to reach out. Kennedy called him, and so the father endorsed John Kennedy. Probably didn't decide the election, but it probably did have some impact. Probably the endorsements are a bigger risk for the entertainer than they are a benefit for the politician. In the 19th century, Edie, they had a simpler way to do this. The political parties would give you free alcohol at the voting booth and got people to turn out.
Now I know why you studied history. We are just about out of time, but we bring you a lot of information each week, and then we make it available online at napolitannews.org. All the polling data we discuss here on the show, it will be posted there. So, Scott, what is the number not to forget this week?
The number not to forget, 81% of Vice President Harris voters can't understand why a reasonable person would vote for former President Donald Trump. And not only that, 72% of Trump voters can't understand why a reasonable person would vote for Harris. That's it for this week on the Scott Rasmussen Show. Stay connected with us all week. For Edie Hill and the great team that helped put this program together, I'm Scott Rasmussen. America, have a great week.